We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba.
Good morning. I'm in my backyard again. It's about 87 degrees Tuesday morning, about 10:47 as I record this today. So, sorry I'm not in Imperial Valley. I'm really not. All right. I've done some thinking, which I know is always dangerous. And I was going to go on a few more weeks in the Sermon on the Mount, and I started looking at it and I started putting stuff together, and I thought, you know what? It's kind of redundant. And so I'm going to leave, this will be our last message and we're going to go on. We'll take next week off, and then the following week we will go into a series on 1 Peter that I'm going to call Stand Firm. I've been thinking a lot about courage and the courage of standing up for your convictions and the things that you know to be are right and wrong. And so we're going to kind of delve into that a little bit. So that'll be starting not next week, but the week after that. Okay? So in the meantime, you get a chance to see my finger. Let's talk about the sheep. Now, we talked about being sheepish, but this is actually about the sheep and them. So the sheep was really more of the sheep's view of the shepherd and the way they handle things. But really, let's look at the sheep. So let's go back to the 23rd Psalm. And the Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. And we talked about sheep. Mentioned that sheep were mentioned over 500 times in the Bible, the most mentioned of all animals. And we're compared to sheep quite a bit. So, like we said, I'm not sure it's always a compliment. Okay, but let's look at this, because remember we talked about sheep. Sheep have to be led. Sheep are helpless in the face of predators. They're weak and defenseless. Sheep have trouble getting along with other sheep. Sheep are totally dependent for their well-being upon the shepherd. And sheep are stubborn and have a tendency to wander away from the shepherd. And again, you read that list and it becomes obvious why we're compared to sheep. Because we fit a lot of those things on the list. We may not fit every one of them. Not every one of us may fit every one of them, but I guarantee you a lot of us hit 3 or 4 at least. Okay? So we're going to talk now about the sheep. We talked about the shepherd. We talked about the path. We talked about the view, the you view of having sheep. But now let's talk about the nature of sheep. The nature of sheep is to follow. Okay, so the first thing we need to know is that sheep that follow are followed. Now, this is interesting because it really goes further than, now we're not just talking about how us as sheep are handled, but actually how us as sheep relate to the other sheep. So look at Psalm 23:6. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord. Everything that the shepherd does in the life of the sheep is determined by whether or not the sheep follow. Think about that. Now, we've talked about the path that God leads us down. We've talked about, looking at God the way God looks at us. And we've talked about the shepherd being the good shepherd and what he does for his flock. But if the sheep won't follow, then how do you get anything from God? So it's interesting because we've talked about guidance and protection and all those other things, but guidance, provision, protection, correction, and connection are all determined by our willingness to follow. Now, if you haven't listened to last week's message on the path, you really need to go back and listen to it, because that'll help you understand the guidance and provision and protection, correction, connection. Those are all parts of what the shepherd gives us as we go down this path. But if you're not going to follow him down the path, you're not going to get guidance. Obviously, you're not following him. Provision. Remember, we said that the shepherd had made sure that everything was ready for the sheep. All the places they were going to eat, the still water that wouldn't freak them out, and the protection he had for them. He built a little enclosure to protect them. And then the connection of just being with him. Those are all determined by whether or not the sheep follow. If there's an old saying in leadership that if you're leading and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. Well, if the shepherd is leading and you're not following, you're all by yourself. You're not in for his guidance, provision, protection. None of that stuff is afforded to you because you've gone off on your own. The shepherd can only keep you safe when you're with him. He can only provide for you when you're with him. He can only correct you if you're with him. And he can't connect with you if you're not with him. It amazes me how often people say, well, I just feel far from God. Yeah, when's the last time you prayed? Well, I prayed this morning for my breakfast. No. I mean, when's the last time you prayed? When's the last time you went to God and said, hey, God, I need to hear from you? Or how about, hey, God, I just want you to know that I love you and I care. And I'm so thankful for what you've done for me. What kind of relationship would my wife and I have if the only time I talked to her was if I wanted something? And if it was a quick, hey, I just want you to know I need breakfast. You think she'd put up with that? If you do, you don't know my wife. And I wouldn't put up with that either. That's not a relationship. That's somebody using the other person. And yet we have this idea that somehow God's going to be okay with us having a relationship like that with him. No, we've got to spend time with him. We've got to spend time in his word. God's Bible, the Bible is a love letter from God to us. We need to be reading that, learning from it, gathering from it. We talked last week about how we know we're on the right path when it produces righteousness. We can also tell we're on the right path because what follows us or comes as a result of our walk, goodness and mercy, and God's unfailing love. We can, and others should, evaluate just how sheepish we are by what we leave behind us. What is revealed in the wake of your life? David says, goodness and unfailing love wash up on the shore of his steps. Is that what your coworkers would say about you? That wherever you go, goodness and God's unfailing love follow? What about at home? Your spouse, your kids? What about your neighborhood? See, all these people are looking at us. All these people are watching us to see if what we say is true is true. And here's the thing. When we're sheepish, we are followed. People follow us. People watch us to see how our lives are, to see if there is something that we have that they need. And if you have Jesus and they don't, you do have something they need. Unfortunately, sometimes they have to cut through the clutter of our lives and our behavior that are anything but godlike for them to follow us. Look, if you're going to call yourself a Christian, it's more than just you going to church or you carrying a Bible or whatever. It's the way you treat people around you. It's the way you treat people at work. It's the way you treat your family. It's all of those things put together. And trust me, they are not going to listen to a sermon from you if your life doesn't portray what you're saying. Okay? Look at your life and ask yourself if mercy and God's unfailing love or goodness and God's unfailing love are following you. If not, you may have veered off the path, and it's time for you to check your relationship with the shepherd again. It's time for you to make sure that you're on God's path. Second thing is that sheepish sheep are confident and conscious. Now we'll explain that in a minute. Confident and conscious. Look at verse 6 again. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life. And don't call me Shirley. Sorry. I couldn't pass it up. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord. Now, there's something really cool here. Read that sentence again. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life. He's confident. The psalmist is confident of that. He's conscious of the fact that God is protecting him. He's conscious of the fact that God is giving him provision. He's conscious of the fact that God is with him. And because of that, he knows that God's goodness will follow him. Remember back, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Why? Because you're with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. Surely because I'm favored. Surely because I know the shepherd. Surely because I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Surely because I trust him. Doubt if you want, but I don't. Question is, you look at my current situation, but I don't. Like Job's friends, step up to me and try to get me to curse the shepherd and die, but not me. Why? Because surely, see my sickness, but I see surely. You can see my brokenness, but I see my surely. Surely goodness and God's unfailing love are going to follow me. Now, we need to know that we get a sense of who God is by our surely. Can we say, surely goodness and God's unfailing love are following me? Do we have that confidence? Are we conscious of the fact that God is doing all of these things for us, and because he's doing all these things for us, that gives me hope for tomorrow? Because if he did it today, he's going to do it tomorrow. If he did it yesterday, he'll do it today. We somehow get the idea that faith is this idea of just stepping off the edge of a cliff. And sometimes God may require that of us. Not necessarily in a literal sense, but you may take a step of faith we talk about. But that faith is not based on anything other than the fact that, look, God did it for me yesterday. He did it for me a year ago. He's doing it for me today. I know he's going to take care of me. Confident because I'm conscious of what God has done. Sheepish sheep are confident, but also conscious of where those benefits originate. Now, if I had to tell you that because of my strength, everything's fine, oh man, would I be in trouble. Oh man. But because I am conscious of the fact that my benefits come from God. God is my source. As much as I love her, Lynette is not my source. My boss here at Roughneck, none of those people are my source. My source is God. God is the one who provides for me. Now, all those people may be contributors to my happiness, to my sense of well-being. But God is the source of all of that for me. I don't take God's benefits for granted, but rather I sheepishly maintain a sense of gratitude for the continued faithfulness and consistency of the shepherd. God's never let me down. Even in times when I thought he had. Even in times when I thought that maybe God, where were you? Why didn't you take care of this? A year, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, I look back and say, oh, that's why, God. I told you many, many times, the reason I pastor a church like Remnant is because of one of the worst experiences of my ministry when I got voted out of a church. And at the time, I was pretty ticked at God. God and I had some pretty angry conversations. Well, my conversation was angry. God's was loving. But if I had never gone through that, I would not be in a position like I am now, where, I'm a few months away from traveling full time. I never would have done that. I would still stay stuck as a pastor somewhere and never even looked forward to that. I wouldn't pastor a church like Remnant because that was not on my radar. And I look back and I see how God has taken every step of the way, everything that I've gone through, and said, okay, Jerry, you may not understand it now, but I do. I got you. I got this. So surely if I remain steadfast in my following, I can remain followed. If we're going to be sheepish, then we must remain grateful and conscious of his goodness. Because why? Because that's following us. We must constantly stop and take account. My cup overflows. I have an abundance. I have favor, and I recognize that my confidence in these facts is based entirely on his faithfulness, not on my goodness, not on my faithfulness, because I'm left to my own devices, I'm going to mess up. And it's not because of anything I've done. Ephesians 2:9 says salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done. So none of us can boast about it. You're not saved because you helped 20 little old ladies across the street and earned your merit badge. You're not blessed because God says, oh, well, they're very special. We are all special to God. Salvation's not a reward. No, I will stop and sheepishly give credit to whom credit is due. My cup overflows. I'm pursued by goodness. I'm marked by mercy simply because the shepherd has led me. There's nothing worse than sheep who act like they got what they got by their own wisdom, strength, and abilities. Sheep must remain grateful. Look, when you start thinking that you're the big king daddy and that everything you got is by the sweat of your brow, man, you're cutting God out of the equation. And if you want to see how your life crashes and burns, you cut God out of your life and see what happens. Now, some sheep are confident, but not conscious. Some sheep are conscious, but not confident. But sheepish sheep have a surely, confident and conscious. Surely goodness, surely God's unfailing love will follow me. Every sheep has a lived decision. Every sheep has a lived decision. David ends his examining of the shepherd and the path with a powerful decision. Look what he says in verse 26 again. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord. As a sheep, I will live in the house of the Lord forever. The sheep makes the choice. Remember, in the beginning of a session of this message, we said that we all follow. You're going to follow someone. You were made to follow. So you may follow fads. You may follow famous people, or football players, baseball players, friends, finances, or fun. David recognized that sheep have a lived decision to make. Where are you going to live? With whom are you going to live? He's basically saying that when I examine my options, my benefits, the path, and I take all of that into account, I have made up my mind that I will make a decision to live in relationship with the shepherd. Now, some people follow just because they're going with the flow. Why do you go to church? Well, I've always gone to church. My family's gone to church. Some others will follow because other people follow. Some follow because their parents followed. Some follow because it's routine. Some flock for favor. Some flock for fellowship. Some flock out of fear. But David knew that sheep have a decision. Each and every one of us has to make a lived decision. I will choose this day green pastures and still waters. Or I will choose enemies. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm in this for life. I'm in this for the good season. I'm in this for the bad season. I will follow, period. So that means on the days that God leads me to green pastures or green meadows and still waters, man, I'm going to follow. And yeah, sometimes when he leads me through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll follow. Because he's leading me there. I'm on his path. I have what? His guidance, his protection, his provision. I'm in connection with him. All of that is vital to us. Now, here's the interesting thing. The shepherd can make us do some things, but he can't make you decide to live. That's a sheep choice, not a shepherd choice. God will not force you to live for him. He just won't. So my question is, are you living for him? Have you made a decision to live? Have you made a decision to follow the shepherd, to lean on his guidance, to follow his path, no matter where it leads? I know my path with the Lord has led through some rocky terrain. And even though I sometimes am unfaithful, even though sometimes I whine and complain, God is always faithful. So, are you in this as long as it's convenient and comfortable? Are you in this when everything's a cakewalk? Or maybe you're in this in a place where you've got nowhere else to turn, and so that's why you're following God. That's not enough. I mean, it's a good start. It'll get you on the road. But you've got to decide to live. You've got to decide that you're going to live in God's grace. That you're going to live in following Him. Because if you're just doing it for the short term, you might as well not do it. You've got to decide to live. Have you decided to follow Jesus? No turning back. That song, though none go with me, I will follow. That's an easy choice if you're in green pastures beside still waters. Whew. But when there are enemies all around and it gets rough, that's a little harder to follow. And we start wondering, hey, God, are you sure this is the right path? I don't know. I mean, He's just the one who made the universe and all the things that went into it, So I don't know why He would know what He was doing. We're so dumb sometimes. We've got to decide to live. Where are you going to live? It's good stuff. I've enjoyed this. I don't think I've ever done a multi-part series on the Lord's on the 23rd Psalm, but I've enjoyed this. I hope you have. I hope it's worked in your heart. Go back and now that we've kind of tied everything up, go back and listen to the other messages again. Go back and see, okay, now I see how the shepherd fits in with the path and how being sheepish fits in with all of this. More than anything, though, follow Christ and recognize what He wants to do in you. It's so good. Father, thanks. We love you, God. You're so good to us. Father, I pray that you will just grab hold of us. Let us dwell with you. Let us live in you. God, you're so good. So good to us. Father, I pray that everybody who's listening or watching this will make a decision to follow you. They will decide that they want to be close to you. They want to be connected to you. They want your guidance. They want your provision. They want your connection, your love. They will decide to live with you. Through the thick and the thin, through the hard and the easy. God, let us be part of you. Thanks, God. Thanks. Work in us now, God. Bless us. We ask it in your name. Amen. Love you guys. Thanks for listening to this and being part of this. And again, if it's been a blessing, tell somebody about it. Tell somebody that's struggling about the 23rd Psalm. Hey, you got to see this. My crazy pastor made a series called Bah. And see if it brings peace to them. Look, God's mercy and God's love are meant to be shared. All right? Love you guys. See you in 2 weeks.
We're poor.